are today as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, God of your fathers, make you 1,000 times more numerous than you are, and bless you as he has promised you. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your land, the fruit of your livestock, and the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your sheep. Blessed shall you be in your coming, and blessed shall you be in your going. The Lord will command the blessing to be with you in your storehouses, and in all things to which you put your hand, and he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. The Lord will open for you his treasure, the heavens, to give rain for your land at its proper time, and to bless all the works of your hands. A good vok, Shavua Tov. How's everybody doing? Great to be starting the week off learning together. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? Joe in the Inland Empire, Yitzhak in Minnesota. Sandy says good evening. Karen in Northern California. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, where it's 12:38 a.m. Wow, amazing. Shkoyach. Belle staying awake in Texas, but the dogs have gone to bed. Thanks, Salanina. Melissa in Great Neck. Paul in the Great Northwest. Bella in Florida. John in Maine. Amazing. You will get rewarded a millionfold, a gazillionfold for being so dedicated to learning. Ella says shalom. Aoife in Florida. Michelle says Erev Tov. Seraphim wishing everyone a good week. Welcome, everybody. Let's get to it. So yesterday, at the end of yesterday, I confessed even then I was confused. But where are we holding? We're now at page 51 here in chapter 5 of Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. We're continuing our discussion of rabbinic enactments made for the betterment of the world, particularly in the area of monetary law. And we were discussing yesterday this idea, this strange case where somebody stole a field, right? So now it makes a little more sense to me. You know, that Shabbos will do that. You back off, you stop everything. When I was learning tonight's daf today, it's like, it started to become more clear that, let's say, right, that Reuven has a field. Right? And he's going to make a sale to Shimon, right? So Reuven is selling a field to Shimon. Now, Reuven has a field, but for the sale to Shimon, he's not going to sell that field. He's going to sell his neighbor's field to which he has no right. He's going to pretend to sell it. It's a scam. Right, so let's say that Reuven's neighbor Levi is away on a cruise around the world for 2 years. So Reuven feels he can get away with this. And so he sells Levi's field to Shimon. He had no right to sell it, but that's what he does. And he draws up a contract and sells this field that he doesn't own. Maybe he thought he did, but he doesn't. At any rate, he sells a field that he doesn't own to Shimon. Now, Reuven does have a field. And Reuven then later goes and sells that field to Yehuda, right? So Reuven, the field that he doesn't own, he sells to, I lost track of the names. The field that he doesn't own, Levi's field, he sells it to Shimon. And the field that he does own, Reuven sells to Yehuda. So when Shimon realizes that the field that he bought and that he worked on for a couple years, that he improved and he added drainage and irrigation and he grew crops there, etc. And then Levi comes back from his 2-year cruise and says, what are you doing on my land? I didn't sell it to you. That's not your land. And so, of course, Shimon goes back to Reuven and says, hey, you sold me a field. It wasn't yours to sell. Compensate me. And Reuven's like, well, what can I do? I don't have any money. Why? He has no money because he sold his actual field to Yehuda and then he spent the money. So, can Shimon now go after the field that Yehuda bought from Reuven? That's the question. Does he have a lien on Reuven's property even when after Reuven sold it to make good on the scam, on the ripoff that Shimon suffered? That's the issue. And what's going on there is, for example, when Yehuda bought the property, did he have any reason or was there any expectation that he would have knowledge that Reuven, ripped off Shimon, scammed him, and that Shimon now is looking for recourse on the money that he lost on that scam by going after Reuven's other property, which in the meantime, Reuven sold. So can Shimon extract that land or part of the value of that land from Yehuda? That's the question that we've been discussing. So we pick this up at the bottom of page 50b. A dilemma was raised before the sages. According to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina, in order to collect from liened property, is it necessary that the obligation be both of a fixed amount and also written? Right, let's go back a couple paragraphs just to sort of set the stage. At the end of page 50, Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to the Mishna, why can't the payment for the consumption of produce be collected from property that the robber, right, in our case, that Reuven sold to another person, that he sold to Yehuda? It is because the produce is not written in the purchaser's deed of sale, right? When Shimon bought the land from Reuven that Reuven didn't have the right to sell, so what did he buy? He bought the land. Did he also buy the produce? I mean, of course he bought the potential that this land could grow produce, but that wasn't mentioned in the deed of sale, right? And it is because the produce is not written in the purchaser's deed of sale. So Rabbi Zera said to Rav Asi, but isn't the sustenance of a man's wife and daughters considered as if it were written in the marriage contract? And what they're comparing to is other areas of the law where the question becomes somebody has a right to be paid by someone either because he was scammed by him or he's a creditor who's owed money, or it's a wife that wants to have the marriage contract paid, or it's a daughter who has a right to sustenance from the estate, right? All these people have a legitimate expectation of being paid, and there are no assets in the estate. There was real property that belonged to the estate or to the scammer or to the husband or to someone that they're going after for the money, but they sold that field. Right, so can we go after that field even though it was sold to some third party who's totally innocent of these obligations? And basically what the question is asking is, would that third party have any reason to know that that field had a mortgage on it, right? Now, he might have got some kind of indemnification in his purchase agreement that if some creditor shows up, or if a woman shows up expecting a ketubah payment, or if someone you scammed shows up looking for payment and he takes it, then you have to make good on that, right? We've already established that Reuven, he has no assets. Right? So this is the kind of mess that often ends up in a bankruptcy court. But what do we do with it? And one of the operative questions is, does that final purchaser have any reason to know when he bought the field that other people might show up and claim the field from him? And one of the enactment that the sages made, that there's a limit to how much he needs to worry about that. Otherwise, people would never purchase pieces of property, since creditors and other people entitled to some of that property could show up at a later date, and then he's out the money and out the field. Right. So Rabbi Hanina says that the reason that payment for the consumption of produce cannot be recovered from property that the robber sold to another person, it is because the produce is not of a fixed amount, i.e. it could not be known at the outset how much produce would grow on the field or what its value would be, and the sages instituted that any obligation that is not of a fixed amount cannot be collected from property sold to another person, because the purchaser of the liened property cannot assess the risk he is assuming of having another person come to collect compensation from that property for a loss that he has suffered in some other transaction with the seller of that land. But, right, if he had a reason to know that other people could come around to collect a fixed amount or an amount that was in writing, as we shall see, then he might, have to cough up that part of the property. Now we go back to our starting point for today, the bottom of 50b. A dilemma was raised before the sages, according to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina. In order to collect from liened property, is it necessary that the obligation be both of a fixed amount and in writing? So if so, this would indicate that Rabbi Hanina adds another requirement in addition to that of Rabbi Yochanan, who said that it needs to be a fixed amount. It seems like Rabbi Hanina is adding that it has to be in writing. Or perhaps in order to collect from a liened property, it suffices that the obligation be of a fixed amount, even if it is not in writing. So the Gemara suggests, come in here in answer to this question, and we're on page 51a now, from what was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagree about the following issue. There is a case of one who died, and he left 2 daughters and a son. And the first daughter went ahead and took 1/10 of the estate as her dowry, as sons are obligated to sustain their deceased father's daughters until they reach majority or become betrothed, and to give them part of his estate as a dowry, right? Remember that under traditional law, only the sons inherit, but the daughters have a right to be sustained and to receive 1/10 of the estate as their dowry so that they can get married, right? So here in this case, the father dies, he leaves 1 son and 2 daughters. One of the daughters claims 1/10 of the estate to be her dowry. But the second daughter did not manage to collect her 1/10 of the estate for her dowry before the son died. Now there's no sons. What happens under traditional Jewish law when there are no sons? Then the daughters inherit and they split it equally. So one daughter already took 1/10 of the estate while the son was alive, which she was entitled to as her dowry. The other daughter could have taken 1/10 of the estate as her dowry, but hey, she didn't do that yet. She wasn't engaged, she wasn't betrothed, it wasn't relevant yet. Then the son dies. So now the daughters inherit the estate. Now, does this daughter who hasn't taken 1/10 yet, does she take her 1/10 and then they split the estate? Or do they simply split the estate at the moment that the son dies? Therefore, the entire estate fell to the 2 daughters, who then divide it between themselves, and there is a dispute as to how they divide it. Rabbi Yochanan says the second daughter loses her 1/10 of the estate, and therefore she cannot demand that she should first receive 1/10 of the estate as her dowry, as did her sister, and that only afterward they divide the remains of the estate equally between themselves. Rabbi Yochanan says the second daughter is out of luck. They just divide it now because the son died. And Rabbi Hanina said to him, did they not say even more than this, that if the brother sold off property belonging to his father's estate, payment for the daughter's dowry can be appropriated from the buyer, but payment for her sustenance cannot be appropriated from him, right? So understand that if the son squandered off the estate, sold off some of it, liquidated it in order to fuel his party lifestyle, let's say, God forbid, and then he dies, and there are no assets left in the estate. Let's say one daughter got her dowry out, the other daughter didn't yet. The son squanders all the money and sells part of it, and the rest spent. So there is no estate anymore. But there was property that belonged to a estate that was sold. So the second daughter can go get her dowry out of that land that was sold to some third party, because there was a lien on that property to provide for her dowry. There's not a lien on that property to provide for her sustenance. That's only out of the movable assets, right? Cash on hand or other things that can be sold that are not real property. But for her dowry, she has a lien on any real property belonging to the estate, and she can go pursue that even if it was sold to some third party. Right, so that third party had to be on notice, right? That he's treated as if he's on notice that, hey, this is an estate. There's daughters in the estate. If all the money is lost, they're going to come after that land that you're buying now, and you're going to lose that value. and the girl has that right, right? So if the father's estate is liened to his daughter's dowry, so that she can collect her dowry even from a third party who bought the property from the son, she should be able to collect it from her father's estate before it is divided up between the daughters. And you say that the second daughter loses her 1/10 of the estate? That's what Rabbi Hanina is saying to Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara tries to draw a conclusion with regard to the question that was raised previously. But isn't the dowry mentioned by Rabbi Hanina, i.e. the dowry to which an orphan daughter is entitled from her father's estate, of a fixed amount, i.e. 1/10 of the estate? And it is not in writing. And nevertheless, according to Rabbi Hanina, it can be appropriated from liened property that had been sold to a third party. Now, the Gemara rejects this argument. A dowry is different since it generates publicity. If one dies and is survived by daughters, everyone knows that a portion of his estate is pledged for their dowries. Therefore, any purchaser of land from that estate has in the back of his mind, he has to know that it's possible that the estate will have no other funds and the daughter will come and say, I need the 1/10 of the estate for my dowry. Therefore, the obligation is considered to be as if it were in writing. In other situations, it might be necessary, according to Rabbi Hanina, that the obligation be both of a fixed amount and in writing. Rav Huna bar Manoach raised an objection from a Mishna in Ketubos 101b that addresses the case of a woman, Ketubos 101b, that addresses the case of a woman who was married to a man with whom she had stipulated that he would sustain her daughter from a previous marriage. After receiving a divorce from him, she married a different man with whom she made the same stipulation, so that the stepdaughter receives sustenance from the two husbands, the husband and the ex-husband. So that Mishnah states if the husbands died, then their own daughters, even from the same woman, are sustained only from the unsold property in the estate, and this accords with the law taught in the Mishnah above on 48b. Right, the daughters have a right to sustenance. The daughters from these men, the natural daughters of these men, the biological daughters of these men are sustained from their estate just by stipulation of the court. That's the law, that their daughters are sustained from the estate. But the woman who brought a daughter into the marriage with these men, she got it in writing in the ketubah, in the marriage contract at the outset of their marriage, that the man would sustain his stepdaughter. So that stepdaughter actually has a higher priority legal right to sustenance from the estate, even than the man's own biological daughters. Now the Mishnah in Ketubot continues, but the stepdaughter is sustained even from liened property that had been sold to a third party. And this is due to the fact that her legal status is like that of a creditor. And therefore she has the right to collect her debt from property that was formerly owned by her stepfather, who in this case, legally is her debtor. And this is difficult according to both opinions, as the stepdaughter's sustenance is appropriated from liened property that has been sold to another person, despite that it is neither a fixed amount, her sustenance, who knows how long she's going to need to be sustained before she gets married, and it was not in writing. Why was it not in writing? I thought it was a stipulation in the ketubah. Now the Gemara, I guess it was not in writing. The amount was not in writing since they didn't know how much it would be. So the Gemara answers, with what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where the mother acquired the right to the daughter's sustenance from his possession, i.e., where they performed an act of acquisition confirming the stipulation in the ketubah. Consequently, it is considered as though the stipulation were written and publicized, so that the property of the two husbands is liened for the stepdaughter's sustenance, meaning that any buyer of his property is effectively on notice that there is a lien on that property to provide the sustenance for the stepdaughter. Now the Gemara asks, well, if that is so, that Mishnah is referring to a case where they performed an act of acquisition, right? Where a kinyan, an act of acquisition, meaning that at the time of the ketubah, it wasn't just signing the ketubah. They performed some physical act in the presence of witnesses so that people would know that stipulation existed. Right, that Mishna is referring to a case where they performed an act of acquisition, then the deceased's own daughters as well should be entitled to collect their sustenance from lien property that has been sold to a third party. But the Gemara rejects this argument. The Mishna is referring to a case where the mother acquired the right to sustenance on behalf of the stepdaughter, but she did not acquire the right to sustenance on behalf of the other daughters. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the decision of the Tana, the Rabbi, the Mishnah, to record the halacha, the law, in a case where the mother acquired the right for this one but not for that one? And the Gemara explains, with regard to his wife's daughter from her previous marriage, who was alive at the time of the act of acquisition, i.e. when he gave the mother her marriage contract, the act of acquisition is effective for her. With regard to his own daughter from this mother, who was not alive at the time of the act of acquisition, the act of acquisition is not effective for her. So the Gemara raises an objection. Are we not dealing here even with a case where both of them were alive at the time of the act of acquisition? And what are the circumstances? It is a case where after she was married to him and had a daughter from him, he divorced her and later remarried her, at which time an act of acquisition was performed to confirm the stipulation with regard to sustenance. And therefore both daughters, the stepdaughter and the biological daughter of this man, would have acquired the right to sustenance. So shall we say that in that case, they can go after liened property, even if it was sold to a third party. As his own daughter was alive at the time, why is the act of acquisition not effective for his own daughter's sustenance as it is for that of the stepdaughter? So rather, the difference between the cases must be like this. With regard to his own daughter, who eats, meaning she is sustained from his estate based on a stipulation of the court, meaning it is always a daughter's right to be sustained from her father's estate. The act of acquisition that was performed is not effective for her, meaning that she can eat from the estate, from the movable assets, but not from the lien property, because her entitlement is derived from a different source, the stipulation of the court that exists for all daughters. But with regard to his wife's daughter, meaning the stepdaughter, who eats from his estate, not based on a stipulation of the court, because stepdaughters are not entitled to sustenance from their father's estate, but rather from the explicit stipulation made in this case between the husband and the wife, the act of acquisition is effective for her and enables her to collect her sustenance even from liened property that has been sold to a third party. But the Gemara challenges this explanation. But is a right that is rooted in two sources, both the stipulation of the court and an act of acquisition, somehow inferior to a right that is rooted in an act of acquisition alone? The act of acquisition is in addition to the stipulation of the court and should be effective for the biological daughter as well. Rather, this is the difference between the cases. With regard to his own daughter, since his daughter eats from his estate based on a stipulation of the court, say that perhaps he already gave her money during his lifetime for her sustenance. Since there is uncertainty, she cannot recover her sustenance from liened property, even if an act of acquisition was performed to confirm the stipulation. With regard to the stepdaughter, there is no concern that perhaps he already gave her the money while he was alive. Therefore, if an act of acquisition was performed, she can collect her sustenance even from lien property that was sold to a third party. The Gemara continues its discussion with regard to collection from lien property that had been sold to a third party. We went into talk about this girl receiving, the daughter or the stepdaughter receiving sustenance from the estate. But the real subject under discussion is when can we extract legally purchased property from a third party who might not have known that there was a lien on that property, but the lien existed, and so somebody else had a higher priority on that land even than its purchaser. Right, so the Gemara continues its discussion with regard to collection from liened property that has been sold to a third party. Come and hear. Come and hear what Rabbi Nussin said. When do we say that if one appropriated a field and sold it, and the buyer worked the land and enhanced it, and then the initial owner from whom the land had been appropriated reclaimed the property, right? So it's our original case that I mentioned at the top of the class, right? Reuben has a neighbor, Levi. Reuben sells Levi's field while Levi is away to Shimon, an illegal sale. Shimon goes and works the land. Then later, Reuven sells his own field to Yehuda in a legal sale, and Yehuda's working that land. Levi comes back from vacation. He says to Shimon, "What are you doing on my land? Get off. No one sold it to you legally." Shimon wants to be made whole. Reuven has nothing, so Shimon goes after Yehuda, who was the legal purchaser of the field that Reuven did own. Can Shimon extract that field, or at least the value for the money he invested in the land? Can he extract that from the field that Reuven sold to Yehuda? Right, that's the question we're examining. So this is okay. And the buyer. Let's just read how it says it. So come in here what Rabbi Nussin said. When do we say that if one appropriated a field and sold it, right? If one stole a field and sold it, and the buyer worked the land and enhanced it, and then the initial owner, Levi, the neighbor, from whom the field had been appropriated, came home and reclaimed the property. Who said that the buyer, right, so Shimon, can recover the increase in value of the field resulting from his enhancements only from unsold property in the robber's possession, right? Any unsold property that Reuven still has, but not from liened property that had been sold to another party, the field that Reuven sold to Yehuda, right? So Levi, in other words, Shimon has recourse against Reuven and any property that Reuven still has, but he doesn't have recourse against property that formerly belonged to Reuven and that Reuven sold to Yehuda, even though it happened after this illegitimate sale to Shimon. And maybe Shimon had in that contract, right, a right to be indemnified if there was something wrong with the sale. Nonetheless, he can't go after the field that now is in Yehuda's possession. So this is said when the purchase of the second buyer, right, Yehuda, i.e. the party purchased the property that rightfully belonged to the robber, to Reuven, preceded the enhancements made by the first buyer to the appropriated property purchased from the robber, right? He can't go after it if the sale was made to Yehuda before Shimon stepped in and improved the property he thought he purchased legally from Reuven. But if the enhancements made by the first buyer, Shimon, preceded the acquisition of the second buyer, Yehuda, from Reuven, then Shimon can collect the increase in value of the field resulting from his enhancements, even from lien property that has been sold to the second buyer, Yehuda. Apparently, he cannot collect the increase in value from the lien property because the enhancements did not come before the sale of the other field, not because the increase in value is not of a fixed amount or in writing in a deed. But the Gemara answers, proof cannot be brought one way or the other from this Baraisa, since the issue is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim. This was never a fixed law. As it is taught in a different Baraisa, the court does not appropriate payment from liened property that has been sold to a third party for the consumption of produce or for the enhanced value of land or for the sustenance of a man's wife and daughters. And the reason why one cannot collect these debts from liened property is for the betterment of the world, because all these obligations are not written in any deed. If purchasers are at risk of losing the land that they purchased in order to pay debts of the seller that had not been in writing, they will have no way to protect themselves and no one will purchase land. So to make a system of that works, they limit the exposure of the buyer of any piece of property that he only, is going to be subject to forfeiture to some creditor that shows up if there was reason to be on notice that such a creditor might show up. And the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Yosef said, and what betterment of the world is there in this, in stating that the reason that the land is not appropriated is only because the debt was not in writing? But isn't the real reason that these obligations cannot be collected from lien property is that they are not of a fixed amount? No one would be willing to purchase land if the land were liened to an unlimited debt. It is clear in this Baraisa that the criteria for collection from liened property that has been sold to a third party are the subject of a dispute between Tanaim. The Mishnah teaches, and that's it. That's where we leave off this discussion of how far you can go in pursuing property that was subject to an unknown lien. Now we're going back to our Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 5, and a different subject that was another enactment of the sages for the betterment of the world, but it has nothing to do with mortgages and lien properties and sales of fields to this buyer and that buyer. The Mishnah teaches, and it was further instituted that one who finds a lost item, right? So it's a big Torah mitzvah. If you find something that was lost and you pick it up and you try to find the owner of the lost object and return it to him, this is a major mitzvah. Big points in heaven for returning lost objects. And sometimes when you return a lost object, it's not so simple. Imagine you find a lost dog. Right, you find a lost dog and you're going to return that to its owner. While it's with you, you got to feed the dog, you got to walk the dog, you're going to have to do, you might have to take the dog to the vet, you might have to do all kinds of stuff to take care of that dog so it remains alive until it can be returned, right? So it was further instituted that one who finds a lost item and returns it to its rightful owner is not required to take an oath that he did not keep any part of the lost item for himself. Somebody loses a wallet with $1,000. Somebody finds it and returns it to him. And when he returns it to him, it has $500 in it. So the guy says, "Oh, thank you for returning my wallet. Did you claim a reward?" $500 is missing. The guy says, "Hey, I found it with $500 in it. Here it is." Now, you might think that we make this person swear an oath that he did not, take for himself the money that's now missing from the wallet. As far as the owner remembers, there was $1,000 in it. This guy who finds it, now the guy who finds it, he seems like an honest person. He found the wallet and he's returning it. Why should we doubt his honesty and accuse him of taking some of the money? And so the sages protect the finder to encourage people to return lost objects, that they don't have to swear an oath that they didn't pocket some of the money. We always discourage people from swearing any kind of an oath because they might make a mistake and then become liable for committing an aveira, a sin. Right? So we don't make people return lost objects are not made to swear an oath that they didn't keep some of it in case some of it is missing. Now, this ordinance was also instituted for the betterment of the world. And Rabbi Yitzchak says, if the owner of the lost item brings a claim against the finder saying, "You found 2 money pouches tied together that belong to me," and the other person says, "I only found 1 pouch," then, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the finder has to swear that oath, similar to anyone who admits to part of a claim. If the owner claims, "You found 2 oxen tied together that belong to me," and the other person says there was only 1 ox, the finder is not required to take an oath. Now, according to the majority, he's not required to take an oath in either case. But now we're trying to understand why Rabbi Yitzchak makes a distinction between 2 money pouches tied together and 2 oxen tied together, where if the one who finds it now turns in 1 money pouch, Rabbi Yitzchak would say, well, then you have to swear an oath that you didn't, keep the second pouch. But if he returns 1 ox and the owner says, no, there were 2 oxen tied together, even Rabbi Yitzchak would not make him swear an oath that he didn't keep 1 ox for himself. And the Gemara explains what is the reason for the distinction between the 2 cases. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, it is that oxen become detached from one another. They might wander apart. They might, chew through the leather holding them together. Consequently, it is possible that when the oxen were lost, there had been 2 that were tied together, but afterward they became separated and the finder found only 1. By contrast, pouches of money do not detach themselves one from the other. Since the finder admits that he found one of them, it stands to reason that he actually found both of them. And since he claims he didn't, Rabbi Yitzchak would make him swear an oath that he didn't. Rabbi Yitzchak also says if the owner of the lost item says to the finder, "You found 2 tied oxen," and the other person says, "I found 2 oxen, but I already returned one of them to you," then in that case, Rabbi Yitzchak would say, you do have to swear the oath. Now, a question may be raised against these rulings of Rabbi Yitzchak. But does Rabbi Yitzchak not accept the law stated in the Mishnah that one who finds a lost item is not required to take an oath, and this being an enactment instituted for the betterment of the world? Now we're on 51b, which is the shorter page tonight. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yitzchak stated his opinion in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as it is taught in a Baraisa Tosefta Shavuos 5:10, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, there are times when a person takes an oath about his own claim. An oath about his own claim. How so? One says to another, 100 dinars of your deceased father's was in my possession, as I had borrowed that sum from him. And I already paid him part of it, but I still owe you 50 dinars. In this case, he is not believed unless he takes an oath that he repaid the half, like anyone who admits to part of a claim. And this is an example of a case where one takes an oath about his own claim. Although nobody has claimed anything from him, he's the one who stepped forward and said, hey, I owe you money. I owed your father, I borrowed 100 dinars from your father. I already paid him back 50, so now I owe you 50. Now, if he hadn't stepped forward, no one would know that he owed the son anything, right? But he's the one who came forward. So you might think we don't make him swear an oath, even though normally when you admit to part of a claim, you're made to swear an oath that you don't owe the whole thing. Here, why should we make him swear? He didn't have to come forward at all, and he did. Shouldn't that be enough? But the rabbis say, in such a case, the borrower is regarded only as someone who is returning a lost item, and therefore he is exempt from an oath. Even though there was an underlying debt, rather than returning a lost item, it's like returning a lost item because no one knew about that debt, right? The son whose father died, he didn't know that his father had lent this man 100 dinars until that man came forward. And so it's treated like someone returning a lost item. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak's position is similar to that of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. In other words, they're both minority opinions. Since the finder says that he found only half of what the owner claims was lost, he is treated like someone who admits to part of a claim and therefore he takes the oath, according to Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but not according to the majority. Now the Gemara asks, but does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov not maintain that someone who returns a lost item is exempt from an oath? And Rav says, the case in dispute between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the majority is not one where nobody has claimed anything from the borrower, as in such a case all agree that the borrower is exempt from taking an oath. Rather, it is a case where the creditor has died, leaving a child as his heir, and this minor confronts the borrower and claims 100 dinars from him. The son did know about the loan. The son, the orphan now, says, my father lent you 100 dinars. And the man says, it's true, he lent me 100 dinars, but I paid him back 50 of it already. Now, in that case, he's going to have to swear an oath that he paid back the 50 and that he only owes the son as the heir at the other 50. The Gemara asks, does the claim of a minor have any substance? But didn't we learn in a Mishna, one does not take an oath in response to the claim of a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, as the claim of one who lacks halachic competence has no significance whatsoever. According to this, if a minor brought a claim against the borrower, it is as though there was no claim at all, but only the borrower's admission. So the borrower should be exempt from taking the oath. And the Gemara answers, to which kind of minor was Rav referring? It was to an adult son of the creditor. And why does Rav call him a minor if he is in fact an adult? It is with regard to his father's affairs that he is like a minor. He does not know with certainty how much money the borrower repaid, but merely says that he thinks he owes his father more. The Gemara asks, if that is so, that we are dealing with a case where the deceased creditor's adult son made a claim against the debtor, how can Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say about this claim that it is his own claim? Is this an oath taken about his own claim? It is an oath taken about the claim of others, i.e. the son. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov calls it an oath taken about one's own claim, although it is really the claim of others, because it is his own admission that obligates him to take the oath. And the Gemara objects all claims that lead to the oath of one who admits to part of a claim are also a combination of the claim of others and the defendant's own admission, right? That's what the nature of this kind of oath is. You say, you lent me 100 dinars. I say, you did lend me 100 dinars, but I already paid you back 50. Maybe you forgot, but I already paid you back 50, and I only owe you the other 50. If this case ends up in court, they're going to make me swear that I paid back the 50 because there's no other evidence. He said, it's he said, let's say. It's only our word against each other, right? How can they know who's telling the truth and who isn't? So they're going to make me swear an oath before God, that I already paid that 50. Making somebody swear an oath obviously is going to be more effective if you're talking about pious people who wouldn't, willy-nilly swear a false oath. But that's what we're talking about here. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis disagree. All claims, where an oath has to be taken because somebody admits to part of a claim, are the result of competing claims. Right, the person makes one claim and the other person makes a different claim, and that's why it results in an oath. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis disagree with regard to a different explanation that's given by Rabbah. As Rabbah says, for what reason did the Torah say that one who admits to part of the claim brought against him takes an oath with regard to the rest of the claim, which he denies, whereas one who denies the entire claim is not required to take an oath, right? If I say, yes, I borrowed 100 dinars from you, but I already paid you back 50, that's where I have to swear an oath that I paid you back 50. But if I say, you never lent me 100 dinars, this whole thing is BS. This whole thing is a lie. This whole thing is nonsense. I deny I ever borrowed from you. In that situation, I don't swear an oath. You're going to have to bring evidence that there was a loan, and if you can't produce that evidence, then you're probably going to be out of luck. Maybe there's witnesses, maybe there is a written document, a promissory note, something. But if I deny the whole claim, that is not a situation in which I'm made to swear an oath. Swearing an oath is only where I admit to part of the claim and deny the rest. And the question asked is, so why, if I admit to part of the claim and deny the rest, I swear an oath, but if I just deny the whole claim, I don't swear an oath? Why is there this distinction in the law? And Rabbah answers, the oath of partial admission is based on a presumption with regard to the defendant's behavior. There is a presumption that a person would not be so brazen as to stand before his creditor and deny his debt when his creditor knows that he is lying. Rabbah continues, and this one who admits to part of the claim would want to deny all of it, and the only reason he does not deny all of it is because a person would not be so brazen before his creditor. And in fact, he would want to admit to all of the claim to him. And the reason that he did not admit the whole claim to him and say that in fact he owes him the entire sum is that he was evading his obligation temporarily. The debtor is short of money and he thinks, I will pay my creditor as much as I can afford now, and I will evade paying the rest until I have enough money, and then I will repay him the rest, to which I have not yet admitted. Therefore, the merciful one states, impose an oath on the debtor in order to induce him to admit all of the debt to the creditor. Maybe the guy will make this partial kind of lie if he doesn't have to swear an oath, but when he does have to swear an oath, maybe he'll come clean, says Rabbah. So following Rabbah's reasoning, the difference of opinion between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis can be explained, and I'm almost done, questions, get them in. And the rabbis can be explained like this. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that there is no difference between the creditor himself and the creditor's son, as in all cases the debtor would not be so brazen as to deny his debt. Therefore, the debtor is not considered like someone who is returning a lost item. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov maintains that Rabbah's reasoning applies in this case as well, so he is required to take an oath. And the rabbis hold that he would not be so brazen as to deny a debt before the creditor himself. But toward his creditor's son, he might be brazen and deny the claim completely. And since he was not so brazen as to deny the entire claim, but he admitted part of it, he is considered like someone returning a lost item, and therefore he is exempt from taking the oath. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 5. Tomorrow, God willing, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, We'll continue with Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 5. Let's see if there are a couple questions, though the hour is late. Load. Come on. It's so funny how Google Docs works. Okay, Bell. I'm having law school flashbacks. In the first case, where the brother sold the land and the younger daughter had not received her 10% dowry, is there any time frame that would cut off the younger daughter from claiming her interest from that sold property? Also, some classmates asked if there was any repository for bills of sale, etc. at that time. I know that a lot of mercantile paper was found in the historic Geniza in Egypt, but what about at the time that we are studying? Right? So Bell is basically asking, was there some kind of registry, like a county recorder, county registrar, somebody who's keeping track of these deeds and potential liens that could exist on a piece of property, so that buyers would have some confidence that when they're buying a piece of land, some creditor isn't going to show up to take it from them. I don't know the answer. But because they're saying it, in the case of a man who died and left daughters, that this would be publicized, or even, I guess, while he's alive, that he has daughters. And therefore the fact that it's publicized, it amounts to the giving of notice. But that's why, which would, I think, indicate that they don't have that kind of local repository. Now, is there a time limit? Great question. I don't know. It hasn't been mentioned. But you can see, because this would cause so many problems, that's why the sages stepped in and, for the betterment of the world, made this limitation that, only certain kinds of liens can be pursued. They need to be in writing. They need to be of a fixed amount. There needs to be, the writing somehow serves that they're publicized, that other people know about it. And I guess maybe, before somebody bought a field back then, maybe the due diligence wasn't, to go down to the county recorder, but rather to ask the people in the neighborhood, do you know of any situation that might interfere with this purchase and sale later? Yitzhak, what is an example of the wording in an oath before God? I don't know off the top of my head. But I think it's probably something along the lines of, I hereby, liened, swear and note that such and such, transpired or didn't transpire. I don't think it's super complicated, but you're taking on that. And that's why whenever, we speak, why I just said, even as a teaching example, I added liened, but I'm not making an oath, right? Even today, we're careful because we say liened, I'm pledging to give money to the shul, but you say liened, lest something not work out about it. It's like there's not any kind of specific formulation that could rise to the level of an oath, just the understanding that it is an oath, I think, but I'm not sure. Joe, cannot Reuven be sold into slavery to satisfy the debt? I think, yes, he probably could, right? He has no assets. Shimon, in our original example, can't go after that field that was sold to Yehuda, although in some cases maybe he can. But yes, when somebody, especially somebody who misappropriates a field, ends up owing money because of a crime, a fraud that he committed, I would think that's exactly the kind of situation where Reuven might have to become an indentured servant for 6 years to pay off that debt. Yeah. Sharon, were they counterfeiting documents, or were so many land deals done without paperwork? You're talking about in the fraudulent land transaction, that would be counterfeiting documents. I mean, I don't know. Remember, so often we're talking about incidents that maybe never happened or happen rarely. That doesn't mean we're not going to study them, right? We still want to figure out what the law would be in such a case. I can't answer as to, how often such a thing really happened. Okay, that's all I've got for tonight. We're running out of time. So tomorrow, 6 p.m., well, let's open Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 5. Shavua Tov, good vach.